I was 16 when my mother threw my suitcase down the front steps. It was mid-January, the kind of winter where the wind feels sharp enough to slice through skin. Snow clung to my shoes as I stood on the porch, staring at the crumpled bag at my feet. I could still hear her voice echoing from inside, cold, flat, final. "You're old enough to take care of yourself. Don't come back." I remember thinking she was bluffing. Parents didn't actually kick their kids out, right? But the door slammed so hard, the frame shook and the lock clicked. The sound was like a gavel in a courtroom, sealing a verdict. I had nowhere to go, no money, no friends I could crash with for more than a night or two. My father was gone, had been since I was 10, and my mother never let me forget whose fault that was. The first night, I stayed at the bus station. I kept my suitcase between my legs, my coat zipped up to my chin, and my eyes half closed so no one would think I was an easy target. By the second night, I'd found a shelter. They gave me soup, a thin blanket, and a mattress that smelled faintly of bleach. It was there, lying under that blanket, that I made myself a promise. I would never need anyone again. Over the next few years, I worked every job I could find. Washing dishes, stocking shelves, cleaning motel rooms where the sheets were stained and the carpet sticky. I didn't care. Every paycheck, no matter how small, was a brick in the foundation of my new life. At 18, I rented my first apartment. It was a single room above a laundromat, the walls thin enough to hear the hum of the dryers downstairs. I didn't even have a bed frame, just a mattress on the floor and a secondhand dresser I'd pulled from the curb. But it was mine. I learned fast how to stretch $1 until it screamed, how to fix a leaky faucet with duct tape, how to keep going when your body begged you to stop. And slowly, things started to change. I got a job at a small marketing firm as a receptionist. 6 months later, I was managing the office. A year after that, I was running my own freelance business from a corner desk in that same apartment. Clients came, referrals followed, and my income doubled, then tripled. By 25, I bought my first house. Not big, but beautiful to me, with creaky wooden floors, sunlight in the kitchen, and a little backyard where I could finally plant something and watch it grow. I built it all from nothing. No loans, no handouts, no family support. And then, 15 years after the night she locked me out, my mother reappeared. She didn't come to apologize. She came because she wanted something. Something I wasn't ready to give. She knocked at noon on a Sunday, the kind of winter bright day where the sunlight lies about the temperature. I opened the door and nearly didn't recognize her. Time had shrunk her. The hard edges were still there, those razor blade eyes, that mouth that never quite learned how to soften, but the scaffolding around them had sagged. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, as if the word had ever belonged to us. I didn't move. My dog, Penny, hovered behind my calf, low growl in her throat. "How did you find me?" She lifted a shoulder. "Small town, big internet." We stood like that, separated by a thin strip of air and 15 years of silence. I thought about closing the door. I also thought about 16-year-old me on a plastic chair in a bus station, shivering inside a coat that didn't fit. "5 minutes," I said, in the kitchen. She walked through my entryway like a tourist in a museum. Her gaze snagged on the framed photos, clients, conferences, the day I signed the deed to the house. She didn't comment. She never had much use for evidence that I could do anything without her. I made tea because it was something to do with my hands. She wrapped hers around the lug and didn't drink. "You look good," she offered. "You look the same," I lied. A smile ghosted across her face. "I always told you you'd land on your feet." "No," I said, gentler than I felt. "You told me not to come back." Her eyes flicked away. That was a bad time. For who? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned forward. I've been thinking about family, about repairing things. The words came out carefully, as if she'd practiced them in a mirror. We don't get infinite chances. Why now? A friend died. Her daughter planned everything, the service, the paperwork. It made me realize how alone I am, how alone you are. She looked at my hands. You must have arrangements. For what? Your estate, she said, as if we'd discussed it every Sunday. You've done well. You should have a plan. You know, trusts, beneficiaries, people who make sure your legacy stays in the family. Whose family? Ours. Quick. Blood is blood. The room cooled a degree. I was blood at 16. She flinched, then smoothed her expression. I was overwhelmed. I made mistakes. I'm trying to fix them. By talking about my will? It's practical. She glanced around again, tallying. You don't have a spouse, children. Someone has to inherit. It should be someone who understands where you came from, who loves you. You don't get to redefine history because it's convenient. I said. My voice surprised me, steady, almost calm. I have people, a chosen family, and a plan. Her mouth pinched. You wouldn't cut your own mother out. I met her eyes. You already cut me out. For a second, I thought she might cry. Instead, she set the untouched tea aside, stood, and let the mask slide back into place. You're being emotional. Think like a businesswoman for once. I am. She left without slamming the door. That almost hurt more. I told myself it was over. A performance, a fishing expedition, nothing else. I walked Penny, I answered emails, I chopped vegetables for soup I didn't eat. 2 days later, a certified envelope arrived. The return address belonged to a law firm I didn't know. Inside, on heavy paper that smelled like ink and money, lay a letter from my mother's attorney. She wasn't asking. She was asserting rights. The legal language was cold enough to burn. Words like entitled and beneficiary by bloodline and reasonable expectation stood out in sharp black letters, each one a scalpel aimed at the life I'd built. I read it twice at my kitchen counter, Penny watching me with her head tilted, sensing the shift in the air. By the third read, I could feel my 16-year-old self pounding on the inside of my chest, confused, furious, and desperate to run. The letter claimed that under certain state provisions, she could be considered an automatic heir unless I'd legally disinherited her. I had, in fact, drawn up a will years ago, leaving everything to a scholarship fund and a few close friends. But apparently, if she challenged it, she could drag me into court. And from the tone of her lawyer's letter, she planned to. I sat down with my own attorney, Marianne, the next day. She was a sharp, calm woman who wore her glasses low on her nose and never sugarcoated. She's bluffing, Marianne said after reading the letter, but only partly. She'd have to prove some sort of legal dependency or emotional bond at the time you wrote the will. It's a stretch, but if she wants to make trouble, she can. She does, I said. My voice cracked on the last word. Marianne looked up. You're not just worried about the money. No, I admitted. I'm worried about her being in my life again. She knows how to get under my skin. And if this goes to court, she'll drag everything out. My past, my name, maybe even people I care about now. She's done it before. Marianne leans back, steepling her fingers. Then we make 2 plans. One legal, one personal. The legal plan will make it near impossible for her to win. The personal plan is about you not letting her own a single inch of your peace in the meantime. Easier said than done. That night, I lay awake replaying her visit. The way she scanned my house like she was appraising it. The way she said blood is blood like it was a moral argument. I thought about the night she kicked me out, how I stood on the porch with my duffel bag, the inside of the house glowing warm behind her while the cold chewed through my jacket. How she'd said, "You'll thank me one day. The world's not going to baby you." I had thanked her, in a way. Every promotion, every award, every hard-earned dollar was proof I didn't need her. But apparently, if she thought that meant she deserved to enjoy the fruits of my survival, Penny nosed my hand. I scratched behind her ears and whispered, "Not happening." The next morning, Marianne called with an idea. If she wants to play the family card, maybe it's time to remind her she folded that hand a long time ago. Are you willing to document everything? I thought about the memories I'd buried, the ones that still made my jaw clench. Yes, I said, every last detail. Because if she wanted a fight, I wasn't 16 anymore. I was ready. The first page of my documentation started with the date I'd avoided writing down for years, October 12th. The day she told me to pack fast because she didn't want the neighbors watching. I remembered the exact time too, 8:42 p.m. The TV was on in the background, some game show where the audience laughed like they were paid to. I'd been doing homework at the kitchen table when she walked in, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You're not my responsibility anymore," she'd said, like it was a fact on a weather report. In my head, I could still smell the burnt coffee from the pot she never washed properly. I could feel the cheap vinyl of the chair under my palms as I pushed myself up, numb. Writing it all down was like walking barefoot across broken glass. Marian had told me to be thorough, so I wrote about the motel I stayed in for 2 nights before the shelter had a bed. I wrote about the jobs that paid cash under the table because I couldn't legally work enough hours at 16. The winter, I caught pneumonia and had no one to call. The scholarship counselor who practically dragged me through the application process because I was too exhausted to believe in a future. Every page made me realize something. I had receipts for my independence, not the paper kind, though there were plenty of those too, but the kind carved into muscle memory. Nights I fell asleep hungry, mornings I woke up early to catch buses that never came. Every mile I'd walked away from her was proof she hadn't been part of my survival. By the time I had 20 pages, I was shaking, not from fear, but from the force of remembering. Penny curled up at my feet as if she knew I was digging through things I'd buried deep. Marian read it all without blinking. When she finished, she tapped the stack. This isn't just legal defense. This is a story. And if it comes to court, judges aren't immune to stories, especially the kind with evidence attached. Evidence. That was the next step. I dug through old folders, scanned documents, found the discharge form from the hospital when I was 17, signed by me alone. Rent receipts from my first apartment, pay stubs with my name and a barely there wage. Each piece made me feel both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I could prove the truth, heavier because proving it meant reliving it. One night, I caught myself standing at the window watching the streetlights flicker. In the glass, I saw my own reflection, older and steadier than the kid she'd thrown out. She'd never once called to check if I was alive. Not on birthdays, not when I graduated, not when I bought this house. And yet here she was trying to step back in, palm open. I decided then that even if I lost the case, which Marian doubted, I'd win the only part that mattered. She'd never mistake my success for her entitlement again. The next morning, I signed the affidavit. Game on. The first hearing wasn't in a grand courtroom like the movies. It was a beige, airless room with scuffed floors, humming fluorescent lights, and a judge who looked like she'd been sipping burnt coffee since 5 a.m. My mother sat on the opposite side, dressed in a black blazer that still had the store's fold lines in the sleeves. Her hair was perfectly curled, makeup precise. She looked like someone playing the role of concerned parent in a low-budget drama. When the clerk called our case, she smiled at me. That same small, poisonous smile I remembered from my teenage years. Sweet enough for others to mistake for warmth, sharp enough to cut me where no one else could see. Her attorney stood, a tall man with a voice like he was narrating a bedtime story. "Your Honor," he began, "my client has come forward seeking her rightful inheritance as the mother of the defendant, who, thanks in part to her upbringing, has achieved considerable success." I could feel Marianne tense beside me, but I kept my eyes forward. Upbringing. That was the word they'd chosen. Not abandonment, not eviction, not dumping a kid at 16 with a garbage bag of clothes and half a loaf of bread. Upbringing. When it was our turn, Marianne's voice was steady, but every syllable carried weight. She laid out the facts like bricks in a wall, each one impossible to climb over. My client has had no financial, emotional, or physical support from the plaintiff for more than a decade. We have documented proof of complete independence since the age of 16, including school records, employment history, and living arrangements. The judge listened, expression unreadable, flipping through the evidence packet. At one point, she stopped on the hospital discharge paper from when I'd been sick, running a finger over the empty parent-guardian line. She didn't say anything, but her eyes flicked to my mother for a second longer than polite. When my turn came, I stood. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. "Your Honor, my mother didn't raise me. She released me. And everything I've built since then was without her help. This isn't about money. It's about someone trying to claim credit for a life they walked away from." I didn't look at my mother while I spoke. I didn't want to see her rehearsed reactions, but I could feel the shift in the room, the subtle tightening in the air when truth refuses to be dressed up as something else. The judge didn't make a ruling that day. She said she needed time to review the documents and testimonies, then scheduled the next date. As we gathered our things, my mother leaned just close enough to whisper, "You've gotten good at speeches. Wonder where you learned that from." I didn't flinch. "From surviving without you." Outside, the winter air hit my face like a baptism. Marianne grinned at me, the first sign of confidence since we'd walked in. "She doesn't know it yet, but she's already losing," she said. I wanted to believe her, and maybe I did, but deep down, I knew the real victory was something the court couldn't give or take away. The days between hearings felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be some new twist, a demand, a settlement offer, or worse, a smear campaign. Instead, my mother kept her distance, which worried me more. She was the kind of person who thrived on proximity, on controlling the temperature of every room she walked into. Silence from her meant she was plotting. Marianne had me gathering every scrap of paper that could paint the full picture of my life after 16. Emails from employers, letters from landlords, even old pay stubs from my first job at the diner. "The more we show your independence," she said, "the harder it is for her to spin a narrative." Some nights, I'd sit on the living room floor surrounded by file folders and memories I didn't ask to revisit. The eviction notice from my first apartment when I couldn't make rent after getting the flu. The credit card statement with interest rates high enough to make you dizzy. The acceptance letter from the community college I almost didn't attend because I couldn't afford the bus pass. I hadn't thought about those years in a long time. Survival doesn't leave much room for nostalgia. But now, each piece of evidence was a reminder, not just of what I'd endured, but of the fact that I'd done it alone. Marianne was relentless. She pushed for a character statement from Mrs. O'Malley, the landlord who took a chance on a 19-year-old with barely any credit history. She tracked down my old boss from the diner, who remembered me working double shifts to pay for night classes. Every new document, every affidavit was a brick in the wall between me and my mother's claims. But it was also a mirror. I was seeing my younger self with fresh eyes, not just the kid who got kicked out, but as someone who'd fought tooth and nail for every inch forward. The night before the next hearing, I barely slept. I kept running through what she might say, the way she might twist the truth. I knew she'd find a way to look fragile, to make her absence sound like sacrifice. When we walked into the courthouse the next morning, she was already there, sitting perfectly straight, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a church service to start. Her lawyer gave me a nod, polite but cold. This time, she took the stand. Her voice trembled just enough to seem authentic. She said, "I always loved my daughter. I gave her the freedom to grow. Maybe I made mistakes, but everything I did was for her to become the woman she is today." I felt the heat rise in my chest. Freedom? That was the word she chose for abandonment? Marianne's cross-examination was surgical. "Can you provide receipts, bank statements, or any records of financial or emotional support after the age of 16? She asked. My mother hesitated. "Well, no, but..." If the last hearing was about facts, the next one was about perception. Marianne warned me that judges are human, meaning they respond to more than just documents. "We've shown the paper trail," she said, leaning across my kitchen table. "Now we show the person. We show you." That might not have to take the stand. The thought of it made my stomach twist. I wasn't afraid of telling the truth, but I knew my mother would be watching every word, looking for cracks. The morning of the hearing, I wore the same navy dress I'd worn to my first job interview after college. Not flashy, not plain, just steady. Marianne said it made me look capable without looking combative, which apparently was a balance you needed in court. When they called my name, I walked to the witness stand with my heart beating in my ears. The clerk swore me in, and suddenly the microphone in front of me felt too close, too loud. Marianne started with soft questions. "Can you tell the court what happened the day you left home?" I described the argument, how it started over a part-time job I'd taken without asking her permission, and ended with my belongings in garbage bags on the porch. I told them about the hours I spent sitting at the bus stop, wondering if I should go back and beg. "Did she ever reach out after that day?" Marianne asked. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Not until last year when she found out about the business." When her lawyer got up for cross-examination, his tone was syrupy, almost paternal. "Would you say you were a rebellious teenager?" "I'd say I was a teenager trying to survive." He tried to frame my leaving as a mutual decision. I corrected him, carefully but firmly, every time. Then came the part I dreaded, my mother's turn to question me directly. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward me with the calm precision of someone approaching prey. "Do you remember," she began, "the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for your school plays?" "Yes," I said. "And the way I taught you to cook?" "Yes. So I wasn't always this monster you're making me out to be." Her voice broke, and for a second, I almost forgot where I was. I said, "You are my mother. That's why it hurt more." A murmur went through the courtroom. She hesitated, then returned to her seat. When the judge called a recess, Marianne leaned in and whispered, "That was perfect. Not defensive, just honest." But as I stepped out into the hallway, I felt anything but perfect. My hands were shaking, my throat tight. Standing in that box, looking at her, I realized that no matter how this ended, a real verdict had already been delivered years ago, on a porch, with my life in garbage bags. And there was no appeal for that. The weeks between hearings felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be some new twist, a demand, a settlement offer, or worse, a smear campaign. Instead, my mother kept her distance, which worried me more. She was the kind of person who thrived on proximity, on controlling the temperature of every room she walked into. Silence from her meant she was plotting. Marianne had me gathering every scrap of paper that could paint the full picture of my life after 16. Emails from employers, letters from landlords, even old pay stubs from my first job at the diner. The more we show your independence, she said, the harder it is for her to spin a narrative. Some nights, I'd sit on the living room floor, surrounded by file folders and memories I didn't ask to revisit. The eviction notice from my first apartment when I couldn't make rent after getting the flu. The credit card statement with interest rates high enough to make you dizzy. The acceptance letter from the community college I almost didn't attend because I couldn't afford the bus pass. I hadn't thought about those years in a long time. Survival doesn't leave much room for reflection. Back then, my only strategy was to keep moving. One job to the next, one cheap sublet to another. I didn't realize until now how much those scars were part of my defense. One night, as I was sorting through a box, I found a faded birthday card from an old neighbor, Mrs. Green. Inside was a crisp $20 bill she'd slipped me when she knew I was short on groceries. Her note said, "You're stronger than you think, kiddo." I stared at that line for a long time. The next day, Marianne called. Her side just submitted something new, she said. A list of witnesses who claim you were always planning to come back home, that you chose to stay away to make a point. It was absurd, but I knew how persuasive repetition could be. If enough people repeated her version, it would start to sound like the truth. "That's not going to happen," I said, more to myself than to her. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend myself in court. I was going to make them see the years they'd try to erase. The girls sleeping on buses because the shelter was full. The young woman working 2 jobs and eating crackers for dinner. They wanted a story, I'd give them the unedited version. Because if I didn't tell it now, she'd rewrite it forever. The morning of the penultimate hearing, the air in the courthouse felt heavy, almost electric. I could see my breath outside as I walked in, clutching the folder Marianne insisted I carry myself. "It's not just evidence," she'd said. "It's your life in there. Don't let anyone else hold it." My mother was already seated at her table, immaculate as ever. She wore a deep burgundy suit that looked expensive enough to cover a month's rent on my first apartment. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. If I didn't know her, I might have mistaken her for a grieving parent here to reconcile. But I did know her, and I knew the performance was part of the strategy. When the judge entered, we all stood. My mother glanced over at me, her lips curving in what she probably thought was a subtle smirk. That tiny expression was enough to send me back years to the kitchen table where she'd look at me the same way before telling me to pack my things. Marianne opens with our exhibits, pay stubs dating back to the diner job, rental agreements in my name, medical records showing I'd been financially independent since I was a teenager. Then she handed the judge a single sheet, a letter I'd written to a scholarship board at 17, explaining why I needed funding for school. My words back then were shaky but clear. I have no family support. I am on my own. The judge read it quietly, his eyes scanning the page twice before setting it down. For the first time in this entire process, I saw my mother's composure falter. Her eyes darted to the paper, then to her lawyer. They tried to object, of course, claiming it was irrelevant to the current matter. But the judge disagreed. "It speaks to the nature of the relationship," he said. I could almost hear her teeth grind from across the room. During a recess, I stepped into the hallway, needing air. A woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was in her 40s with a kind face and tired eyes. "You don't know me," she said softly, "but I knew you when you were a kid. Your mom used to leave you with us for days at a time. I wanted you to know I'm here if you need someone to tell the truth." I felt my throat tighten. For years, I'd carried the weight of my own story like it was something fragile no one else could hold. And now here was a stranger offering to help carry it. When we went back in, I kept my eyes forward. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just standing against her. I was standing with someone. Even if that someone was a woman whose name I still didn't know. The final day in court felt different, not lighter, but steadier. I'd stopped shaking when I walked through those tall wooden doors. My breath came easier. Marianne gave my hand a quick squeeze before we sat down. "This is it," she whispered. "Stay calm. You've already told the truth. Now we let it speak." My mother's attorney went first, painting her as a wronged parent desperate to reconnect in her later years. He spoke of regret and family bonds, words that might have moved me if I hadn't lived the reality behind them. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, gauging my reaction. I kept my gaze on the judge. When it was our turn, Marianne stood, her voice clear and deliberate. She didn't attack my mother. She didn't need to. Instead, she laid out the facts like stones in a path. The eviction at 16, the years of documented independence, the absence of any contact until my life began to show outward signs of success. And then, the part I didn't see coming. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not just about assets. It's about the right to live free from the rewriting of history. My client isn't here to erase her mother from the record. Her mother did that herself, years ago." I felt something release in my chest. The judge leaned forward, folding his hands. He spoke slowly as though measuring each word. "Given the evidence presented and the testimony provided, the court finds no legal or moral basis for the petitioner's claim. This case is dismissed with prejudice." The sound of the gavel was sharp, final. My mother didn't look at me as she stood, gathering her designer bag and walking out. The click of her heels echoed through the room, then faded. I sat there a moment longer, staring at the empty space she'd left. I thought I might feel triumphant, but what I felt was quieter, like stepping out of a storm into still air. Outside, the woman from the day before was waiting. "You did good," she said, handing me a paper cup of coffee. "Thank you," I replied, "for everything." Marianne joined us, smiling in that small, tired way of someone who's just finished a long fight. "So," she said, "what's next for you?" I looked out at the street, the world moving on like it didn't know anything monumental had just happened. "Living," I said simply, without looking over my shoulder. And for the first time in a decade, I believed it.